A bunch of friends, including a very good-looking roommate and me, rented a house a bit away from our city. The house had one level and a basement that wasn't fully fixed up. The person who owned the place started fixing it but didn't finish. So, it had walls around the outside and one room that was sort of done. The rest was just a big open space with just one light hanging down and some old chairs and stuff scattered around. Our group liked to have parties down there. But there was a rule I didn't know about: no sleeping in the basement. We were all about 20 or 21 years old. After a party one night, everyone was trying to find a spot to sleep. I ended up picking an old couch in the basement because there was no other spot left. I only slept for a few hours and woke up around 4 or 5 in the morning. I heard a guy and a girl whispering and laughing in the room that was kinda finished. I thought they were friends from the party, so I decided to tell them to please be quiet, but as I got close, the noise stopped. Maybe, I thought, it was just sounds coming from upstairs, so I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep. The light from the bulb was really bright, and I couldn't figure out how to turn it off. So I just closed my eyes tight and tried to sleep anyway. Then, I felt like I saw a shadow move over my eyes, as if something was between me and the light. That freaked me out. I quickly sat up, saying, "Nope," a lot, and headed for the stairs. The floor was uneven, making my footsteps sound weird. But I kept hearing those footstep sounds even when I wasn't moving. I stopped when I got to the stairs and listened. The creepy footstep sounds kept going, so I ran up the stairs fast. At the top, I looked back, half expecting to see something, but there was nothing there. I waited a little, then heard a sound like someone stepping on the bottom stair. I quickly shut the door, standing back and watching, but nothing came through. I was super worked up and started looking for one of my friends who lived there, trying really hard not to wake up anyone else. I found the good-looking roommate sleeping on an air mattress in the living room. I shook her awake and said, "CC, wake up. Your basement has a ghost." She just looked at me like I was a bit silly and said, "Yeah, we told everyone not to sleep there. Turns out I missed that warning." I asked if I could sleep on the edge of her air mattress, and she let me. The next day, they told me all the ghost stories about the house. Turns out, not just the basement but the whole main floor had creepy stories, but the basement was the creepiest place. To offer a bit of background, when my wife was a child, her family, including her grandparents, lived together in one house. Tragically, in that home, her grandfather was murdered, specifically in his bedroom upstairs. For over 20 years following this terrible event, the room was relegated to a storage space. Despite several attempts to sell the house, the notoriety of the murder in the small town made it impossible, and the family remained. Some years later, while my wife and I were engaged, a trial concerning the murder took place. I attended in support of her family and was exposed to the crime scene photos, a detail that's relevant for later. Fast forward a few years, and we had 2 children, our eldest being 6 at the time. The topic of the murder was a forbidden subject within the family, and up until today, our children remain unaware of the events. A change occurred when my father-in-law decided to repurpose the murder scene into a playroom for the grandchildren whenever the family gathered. He prepared the room with sleeping bags and a TV just in time for a holiday reunion. Despite our discomfort with this decision, we chose not to voice our concerns due to the sensitive nature of the past events. Additionally, he proposed for all the grandchildren to sleep together in that room. Since we were the first to arrive, our son explored the room alone. Noticing his unusual stillness after a couple of hours, I decided to check on him. During our conversation, he was noticeably tense and fixated on the TV screen. "Hey buddy, is everything okay up here?" I asked. "Yeah," he replied quietly. "All right, have fun," I encouraged, but his next words stopped me in my tracks. "Daddy, do I have to sleep in here? I don't want to." Puzzled, I inquired, "Why not?" "I'm not alone," he said, a statement that sent shivers down my spine. Attempting to lighten the mood, I replied, Well, yes, I'm here with you, buddy. No, there is someone else in here with us, he insisted. Determined to understand, I asked, are they nice? Mean? An adult? A child? An adult, he answered. And what are they doing right now? I pressed. They're watching you. This was highly unusual. He had never said anything like this during any of our previous visits. They never leave this room, and I've never been in here before, he continued. Where are they now? Without shifting his gaze from the TV, he pointed to the distant corner of the room, the exact location where his great-grandfather was murdered, and whispered, They're standing over there. They don't move much. Immediately, I reassured him, Okay, buddy. You don't have to stay in here, and he promptly left the room with me. In high school, I had a babysitting job for a single mother with 2 daughters. It was deep into winter, and by the time I got there around 6 p.m., darkness had already enveloped everything outside. She lived in one half of a duplex. As I stood in the living room discussing the evening's plans with her and her daughters, an unexpected visitor made an entrance. A little boy, decked out in full snow gear, walked in through the front door, traipsed through the living room right past us, and made his way down to the basement. Strangely, the mother didn't even glance his way or pause in her conversation. Similarly, the daughters didn't acknowledge his presence. I found the situation incredibly odd, but, being an extremely introverted teenager at the time, I hesitated to question the mom about the mysterious visitor. After the mom had left for the evening, curiosity overcame me, and I asked the girls about the little boy who had entered earlier. They were both puzzled, claiming they hadn't seen anyone come in. Gathering my courage and a broom for good measure, I ventured down to the basement. It was a small, unfinished space, essentially a single room without any closets or hidden areas. There was no sign of the boy, and it was clear he hadn't returned upstairs during that brief interval. That experience stood out as eerily bizarre in my memory, marking the only occasion I've ever seriously considered the possibility of something paranormal. I'm typically skeptical of ghost stories and the like. Throughout my life, I've encountered several notable experiences, but I've yet to share this particular one until now. It happened during a visit to my grandparents' home. I was in their bathroom, preparing to enjoy a swim in their pool. The bathroom featured a distinctive, small, octagon-shaped window which was perched high on the wall and offered a view of the porch below. As I sat on the toilet beneath this window, my gaze inadvertently drifted upward, and I was met with a startling sight. A man appeared to be pressing his face against the window, his expression akin to a scream. The most unnerving aspect was his skin. It seemed charred and was giving off an illusion of smoldering. Patchy, dark tufts of hair sporadically covered his head, and his petrified expression was reminiscent of a moment suspended in time. For reasons I can't entirely explain, I chose not to share this chilling encounter with anyone. Instead, I quickly vacated the bathroom and sought refuge in another on the upper floor of the house, one devoid of windows. Curiously, I continued to use only that upstairs bathroom until my grandparents eventually moved from that house. Interestingly, the house itself did not have the aura of being ancient or ominous in any way, which only added layers to the mystery of that day's events. When I was a teenager, my room was in the basement. Every step on the stairs and every move on my noisy bed could be easily heard. One night, as I was about to fall asleep, I heard steps. I thought to myself, it's probably just Mom doing laundry late at night, and went back to sleep. Soon after, I felt like someone sat on my bed behind me, which made the bed squeak. I was really scared but told myself to just stay still and try to sleep. This spooky thing happened a few times until one night I got so scared but decided to see what was there. I turned around quickly when I heard the squeak again and felt the bed move, but there was nothing there. I've seen and felt strange things before, but that scared me the most. Other times, when I was lying in bed, it felt like someone sat down or even lay down next to me. I was so scared that I started sleeping on the couch in the living room for many weeks. One night, annoyed by our cat, I went back to sleep in my room. Everything was fine until I woke up to what sounded like my parents arguing loudly downstairs. I opened my eyes and saw a shadow figure standing at my door, holding the knob. Just when I realized that it couldn't be a real person, the shadow slammed the door. I was really scared, but then, suddenly, the door was open again and the light from downstairs was gone. I asked my mom if she heard anything or if we had visitors, but she didn't hear anything and was just reading her book in the living room. After that night, I never felt like someone was sitting on my bed again. One night, I was walking back from my grandmother's house in our small village in rural Ireland. My home and my grandma's were connected by a long, narrow country road. That evening was different because my granddad was very sick, and the priest had just visited him to give him a special prayer, thinking he might not make it through the night. But my grandma told me to go home and rest. So, I started walking down the same road I've known all my life, but it felt strange and a bit scary, which was unusual for me. As I was almost home, I saw something white near a gate by the field next to my grandparents' place. At first, I thought maybe a lamb had gotten out. It happens a lot. But when I got closer, I felt a weird shock all over, like when you get really scared, and all my hair stood on end. There, instead of a lamb, was an old woman in a white dress, and she let out the loudest, most terrifying scream I've ever heard. It was the kind of scream that makes you think of someone finding out they've lost someone they love very much. I was so scared that I ran as fast as I could back to my grandma's house. When I got inside, my grandma was coming out of my granddad's room, crying, and told me that he had just passed away. It was so strange because it happened right after I saw and heard that scary woman. Later, when I talked about it with my aunt and some other family members, they said this woman is known to our family. She shows up when someone is about to die. Even my dad, who usually doesn't believe in these kinds of things and is very religious, said it's true. In Ireland, some people call her the Banshee. That night and the sound of the Banshee's scream are things I'll never forget for as long as I live. When I was younger, our house was way out of town, up in the mountains, near some old railroad tracks. This place used to have a lot of trees being cut down and people looking for gold. One night, the moon was really bright and lit up everything outside. For some reason, I decided to look out the window. About 20 yards away, on the road, there was a man standing still, looking at our house. He had on one of those old-fashioned helmets that miners wear. I wasn't sure if he could see me, but I couldn't move. After about 10 minutes, I finally moved away from the window and tried to forget about it by going back to bed. But I couldn't sleep, and about an hour later, I checked again. He was still there. It scared me so much that I didn't want to look out the window again that night. I kind of forgot all about this until a few years later, when the same thing happened again. It was another night with a really bright moon. I woke up and looked outside. There was the same man, wearing the same hat, standing in the same spot, just staring. I never talked to anyone about it, and I can't tell if it was something ghostly or just a really weird person hanging around. When I was about 7 years old, I felt sick one day and ended up falling asleep on the couch in my dad's office. This office had 2 doors, located between the kitchen and a hallway. I must have dozed off in the early evening and didn't wake up until the middle of the night. To my surprise, our 2 cats were locked in the office with me, meowing loudly. Feeling sick and scared, I just sat there and started to cry. Within a few minutes, my older brother came to the rescue. It was strange because he usually had his headphones on at night, listening to his Walkman. Yet, there he was, opening the door from the kitchen and reaching out to me as if to say, "It's okay, come here." Holding his Walkman and headphones in his other hand, I grabbed his hand and he led me downstairs to his room, letting me sleep there for the night. Years later, as a teenager, I was sharing this story at a family event when my brother interrupted to say he never came upstairs to get me. I had walked down to his room by myself. That didn't make sense to me. I remembered being too scared and too disoriented to leave the room on my own. Plus, I was really afraid of my dad's basement back then, so I wouldn't have gone downstairs without someone with me. I clearly remembered sitting there, crying, until he opened the door, while he had a vivid memory of me showing up next to his bed. So, to this day, it remains a mystery who or what took my hand and led me downstairs that night. Please fix and enhance. Keep the same context. Use simple words. I'll take some time to type this. It's a little long, but still scares me every time I think about it, and I still can't comprehend it. When I lived in Oregon, I worked IT for the community college. I wasn't getting out until 9 to 10 p.m. by myself. It was a normal day like any other. By the time I left work, it was pitch black, and the thick underbrush made it even harder to see. This will be important later. I drove through town and finally got to the highway that led from Lincoln City to Corvallis, which was a long stretch of empty highway that ran 1+ hours through the forest. After about 45 minutes, I got to the hill that split into 2 lanes on both sides. As I accelerated in my tiny lawnmower of a car, I noticed something moving alongside the guardrail. Okay, I thought, it's a deer, no big deal, just slow down and avoid the cute little bugger. I was extra careful because that thick underbrush meant each side of the road would be a deep well of blackness that could have any little critters hiding there, waiting to jump into your windshield. Well, before I could finish that thought, I saw feet. If you're from Oregon, you know the homeless situation is abysmal. It wouldn't be too strange for one of them to be hitchhiking out here, but it was definitely out of sorts this late at night. Well, I decelerated to about 65. I was going 70+, and kept an eye on those white shoes walking up the road. By the time I actually realized those were leg/shoes walking, the man darted out in front of my Nissan in what I thought was a suicide attempt. I slammed on the brakes, trying to avoid him. I'm getting goosebumps just typing this, and ended up sliding sideways, going 60 miles per hour in the opposite lane while the man ran out in front of me, relentlessly. All I could see was his red plaid shirt and his body as he hit the hood of my car. When I came to a stop, he was leaning on the hood, staring directly at me. The primal fear I felt was something I didn't even know existed. The high beams of my car didn't even pierce whatever this man was. It was the blackest shadow, a void dot. Then in an instant, he vanished. Gone. I was breathless, absolutely breathless, shaking. Thought I'd killed someone. I sat in the opposite lane, sideways, breathing heavily for a minute or two. I couldn't help but scream at that point and pound on my accelerator to get out of there. I called my husband screaming and crying that I just killed a man, but that he disappeared and I didn't know what was happening. I left the scene, I know, illegal. By the time I got home, 30 minutes later, I was still shaking. I got out of my car and ran to the hood, seeing no dents, no handprints, nothing. I didn't sleep that night. Here's where it got more messed up. The next day at work, I researched deaths on that highway and found that a man rode his truck with his wife and child inside. All 3 died. I highlighted his name and input it into Facebook. The first profile that came up was a memorial for that man. In his profile photo, he wore a red plaid shirt. I returned a few weeks later. In that same area where my skid marks were was the guardrail. Tied to that guardrail was, and probably still is, a moldy child's toy, a rabbit. Something is deeply, deeply haunted about that highway. I'm just glad there wasn't anyone in the oncoming lane or I too would be trapped there along with that man. Whoever he was.